Good evening, Professor. For my presentation today, I will be discussing the impact of culture on different cognitive developmental characteristics. A small overview of the topic. There are 5 cognitive developmental characteristics that will be reviewed in today's presentation. They are memory, language, learning, perception, and problem solving, and how culture affects each of them individually. Each culture has its own way of treating people in different age groups, and this can put children on different developmental pathways. Due to this, it is important for us to understand how each culture can affect the different cognitive developmental characteristics of an individual. The impact that culture has on memory. Cultures are known to differ in their prioritization of focal object versus contextual background information, with Westerners tending to devote more focus to objects and Easterners devoting more of their focus to the backgrounds. One study found that Japanese participants performed better at recognizing changes in the facial expressions of background characters when compared to Americans that were completing the same task. Researchers also believe that enculturation and cultural values can influence childhood memories, and a study done by Mullen in 1994 found that Asian and Asian American undergraduates' memories happened an average of 6 months later than the Caucasian students' memories. The impact of culture on language. Studies have found that cultural adaptation in EFL courses, which teach English as a second language, can be very effective in helping students to learn the new language. Studies done in the Middle East, Turkey, and Spain have suggested that the use of culturally familiar contexts can effectively engage the learners with the material. Tariq, 2023, found that understanding the relationship between culture and language was helpful for the learners to decide the exact meaning of vague expressions that were used in different contexts, and that this also reduced some of the obstacles that the students were facing when communicating with other foreign language speakers. The impact of culture on learning. Culture is important to learning transfer specifically because a cultural barrier may prevent people from engaging in various aspects of the learning process, such as, for example, if they do not see their culture reflected in the facilitators and other participants, then their learning experience might be less likely to lead to changes in their practice. Sheridan et al. 2019 found that students who read the culturally familiar version of the articles rather than the non-culturally familiar version of an article tended to score higher in reading comprehension and vocabulary retention. Some studies have also found a relationship between cultural factors such as collectivism versus individualism and learning transfer, and that cultural differences can impact not only learning, but the training process as well. The impact of culture on perception. Research has shown support for the idea that culture conditions an individual's perception by providing them sets of values, life expectations, and needs which affect that individual's basic sensory perceptions. Cultural differences also emerge in the ways Westerners or Easterners perceive the self versus others in key areas of perception, such as the perception of emotions, the perception of the environment, and sensory perceptions. People in Western cultures have their self-perception primarily comprised of unique personal traits and attributes, while people in Eastern cultures tend to perceive the individual as more connected and less differentiated from others, and also tend to focus on the interpersonal domain and how their public self appears to the rest of society more. The impact of culture on problem solving. Ariely and Sagi, 2018, found that members of individualistic cultures tended to perform better when completing rule-based problems, while collectivistic cultures performed better in context-based problems. In their fourth study, Ariely and Sagiv 2018 found that for solving rule-based riddles, directing participants' attention to the individual resulted in better performance than when directing participants' attention to the group, and the opposite emerged for context-based problems. The ingrained cultural mindset of an individual can influence their performance in problem solving, and by priming a cultural mindset of individualism versus collectivism, can recreate the problem solving patterns found between the two cultural groups. Why this is important to current society. Since so many countries have people of many different cultures living in them, it is important to understand and research how these cultural differences influence cognitive development and the different characteristics belonging to them. Knowing how people from different cultures learn or perceive others can be helpful in creating learning plans and teaching plans that are helpful for each person and prevent miscommunications from occurring between individuals. It is also helpful to know how an individual culture impacts them, as for example, it can impact their memory differently. So when children are being evaluated or taught in schools, knowing how they think differently can be helpful in making sure they are receiving the necessary help or materials. Evolutionary theory. This theory utilizes the application of an evolutionary perspective to understand why humans develop, think, and behave the way that they do. Evolutionary theorists examine questions such as why humans in some cultures and subcultures rely heavily on the parental investment strategy, while other humans decide to go with the mating strategy. In addition to biological evolution, cultural evolution also has an impact on development and is the process through which we inherit from previous generations a human environment and the ways of adapting to it, and then how we as humans invent better ways of adapting and adjusting to the changing conditions in that environment, and how we pass that on to the next generation. Development in infancy. It is important for infants to have a caregiver that responds to their needs by providing them with dependable, sensitive, and loving nurturance. And when this is provided, the infant can be said to be securely attached to their caregiver. It was originally believed that secure attachment was normal and evolutionary adaptive, but questions have recently arisen about if it was merely shaped by natural selection to be this way. In the evolutionary theory, there are two pathways, the slow pathway and the fast pathway. Secure attachment has been found to be congruent with the slow pathway, while insecure attachment has been found to be congruent with the fast pathway. Many of the behaviors of infants support the view of evolutionary theorists that empathy, pro-social behavior, and cooperation are part of our evolutionary heritage. Development in infancy continued. Infants are able to quickly develop an implicit sense of self and develop a sense of agency, which is a sense that they can cause things to happen in the world by the time they are 2 or 3 months of age. Infants develop joint attention, the sharing of perceptual experiences by two people by the time they are 9 months of age, and develop self-recognition, which is being aware of themselves as distinct individuals, by 18 months of age. The culture of the infant can also play a part in their development of self-awareness, with self-awareness expected to develop more rapidly in individualistic cultures rather than collectivistic cultures due to how the two cultures differently deal with self-awareness. Development in middle childhood. Evolutionary accounts of middle childhood are typically focused on learning, helping, and other forms of social integration. Middle childhood is also a likely target for sexual selection. Most likely, due to natural selection arising from the process of choosing mates and competing for mates, and this is a time when sex differences emerge and intensify. By mid-elementary school, children are able to differentiate among 5 aspects of self-worth. Also, due to increased sensitivity to the environment, the expression of new genetic factors can occur, and the new genetic factors tend to come into play around the age of 7. During middle childhood, general intelligence and language skills also tend to increase markedly. Development in middle childhood continued. Older children tend to learn faster and memorize better than younger children due to several factors, such as changes in their basic capacities, changes in their memory strategies, an increased knowledge of memory, an increased knowledge of the world, and an increased use and accuracy of memory scripts. By the age of 6 or 7, children master the concept of conservation and are able to engage in decentration, which is the ability to focus on 2 or more dimensions of a problem at a time, and is especially important in mastering the concept of conservation. Children are also able to better recognize other people's perspectives and aren't as egocentric. It is also predicted that the metabolic changes in middle childhood might reflect the programming effects of the early environment that the child was in and the activation of their new genetic factors. Discussion of development in adolescence. Erik Erikson, 1968, as cited in Siegelman and Ryder, 2021, characterized adolescence as a critical period during the lifelong process of forming an identity as a person. During adolescence, the process of gender intensification can occur, which is when gender differences may be magnified due to hormonal changes associated with puberty and the increased pressure to conform to gender roles. Adolescents' perceptions of their peers' thoughts and expectations can also affect their behaviors and lead to gender intensification, even if no expectations are being placed. Adolescents can also engage in more risk-taking behaviors, and evolutionary theory views this as a means for the individual to obtain potential gains. Discussion of development in adolescence continued. Male adolescents, in general, tend to engage in more risk-taking behaviors than females, and evolutionary theory believes this to occur as a result of the higher benefits that males obtain from their behaviors when compared to females. In adolescence, a strong moral identity, which is viewing being caring, fair, honest, and moral as a central aspect of who you are as a person, may develop as a part of their broader search for identity. Adolescence is also a period of significant growth in their moral reasoning, and there is a shift from pre-conventional to conventional reasoning, which becomes the adolescent's dominant mode of moral thinking. Some adolescents may engage in antisocial behavior, which includes excluding peers and undermining their status in group through rumors and lies at a greater frequency, as well as non-aggressive rule breaking. Discussion of development in adolescence continued. There are 2 groups of antisocial adolescents, the early onset group and the late onset group. Highly antisocial adolescents often grow up in a coercive family environment, but genetic differences can also account for about 40% of the individual differences in antisocial behavior and can also impact an adolescent's development of this antisocial behavior. Some cultural contexts are also more likely to breed aggression than others, and this can also make a difference within a society as well and impact the likelihood of an adolescent developing antisocial behaviors. For example, in Japan, which is a collectivistic culture, adolescents are less angered by interpersonal conflicts and are less likely to react aggressively to those conflicts when compared to American adolescents facing the same conflict. These are the references that were used throughout my presentation. Thank you.